Who the hell are you? Victoria Hale's voice cut across the executive lobby of Hale Dynamics so sharply that two senior directors stopped walking. Ethan Brooks stood 10 feet from the glass conference room, holding a worn leather folder beneath one arm, his expression unchanged. He wore a simple charcoal jacket, clean white shirt, and the kind of shoes no one in the room would notice twice. Victoria stepped closer. This floor is restricted. Ethan nodded. I know. Marcus Reed, the chief operating officer, came out of the conference room carrying a $650 million acquisition deck. He looked at Ethan, frowned, then laughed once. You have got to be kidding me. Victoria glanced toward him. You know this man? Former contractor. Years ago. Marcus looked Ethan over. Very former. Ethan said nothing. That seemed to irritate Marcus more than an argument would have. Security should have stopped you downstairs. They tried. Then why are you here? Ethan looked past him toward the acquisition deck visible through the conference room glass. Because your debt model is missing one company. Marcus's smile disappeared for half a second. Victoria folded her arms. Excuse me. Ethan pointed toward the presentation screen inside. The acquisition structure. You can read that from here? Enough of it. Marcus stepped between Ethan and the glass. You are not authorized to review anything. Then you should probably cover the screen. One director looked down to hide a reaction. Victoria did not. Her face hardened. Mr. Brooks, whatever relationship you once had with this company ended a long time ago. Ethan looked at her. That is true. Then leave. He glanced at his watch. Downstairs, his 10-year-old daughter Lily was sitting in the employee cafe with a coloring book, waiting for him to finish what he had promised would be a 10-minute conversation. Ethan hated making her wait. He hated this more. I will leave, he said. After someone checks Marston Systems. Marcus's eyes changed. Just slightly. Ethan saw it. Victoria did not. Who, she asked. Marston Systems. Subsidiary acquired 18 months ago by the target company. Marcus recovered quickly. Irrelevant. Ethan looked at him. Then the liabilities should be easy to dismiss. There are no material liabilities. You sure? Marcus stepped closer. I prepared the operating assumptions myself. That is why I am asking. The lobby went quieter. Beyond the glass walls, late afternoon lights stretched across polished floors. A security officer appeared near the elevator, waiting for Victoria's signal. She gave it. Escort him out. Ethan nodded once, almost as if he had expected nothing else. The security officer approached. Sir, I am going. Ethan turned toward the elevator. Then the executive doors opened behind them. An older man entered slowly, carrying a black portfolio. Charles Whitman, chairman of the board, had not attended an operational review in person for nearly 6 months. Victoria straightened. Marcus immediately stepped aside. Charles looked toward the security officer, then toward Ethan. He stopped walking. Ethan. No one spoke. Ethan turned. Charles's face changed from surprise to something almost relieved. Ethan Brooks. Victoria looked between them. Marcus went completely still. Charles crossed the lobby and extended his hand. I wondered when you would come back. Ethan shook it. I was hoping not to. Charles glanced toward the acquisition room. Then something must be wrong. Ethan looked at Marcus's deck. Maybe. Victoria's voice was quieter now. Chairman Whitman, you know him? Charles turned toward her. Know him? He looked back at Ethan. 12 years ago, this company was 6 weeks from running out of cash. The room held its breath. Charles continued. Ethan Brooks designed the restructuring that kept Hale Dynamics alive. Victoria said nothing. Ethan did not smile. Downstairs, Lily was still waiting beside her coloring book. Upstairs, one name had just changed the temperature of the entire room. Charles Whitman did not take Ethan Brooks into the conference room immediately. He stood beside him in the executive lobby for several seconds, studying the worn leather folder under Ethan's arm, as if that alone confirmed something he had hoped not to see. What brought you back? Charles asked. Ethan glanced toward the elevator. A question. Marcus Reed folded his arms. He already asked it. Charles looked at him. And Marcus answered too quickly. It is based on incomplete information. Ethan remained quiet. Victoria Hale watched all 3 men, still trying to reconcile the stranger she had nearly removed from the building with the man the chairman had just credited with saving the company. Mr. Brooks, she said, more carefully now, what exactly do you believe is missing? Ethan looked toward the glass conference room. Marston Systems was folded into the acquisition target 18 months ago. Their debt was refinanced, not eliminated. Marcus shook his head. Those obligations were transferred to a special purpose entity. Correct. Which your model treats as non-recourse. Marcus's expression tightened. Ethan continued. But the operating guarantees remain attached to the parent company if the subsidiary misses 2 consecutive coverage tests. Charles turned slowly toward Marcus. Is that true? Technically, there are guarantees. How large? Marcus hesitated. Victoria noticed. Marcus. He looked at her. Potential exposure is still being quantified. Ethan opened his folder and removed 3 pages. $214 million if the current coverage trend continues. The room went silent again. Victoria stepped closer. Where did you get that? Public filings, lender notices, and one covenant schedule your acquisition deck does not show. Marcus's voice hardened. You are presenting worst-case exposure as certainty. Ethan looked at him. No, I am presenting undisclosed exposure as something worth checking before spending $650 million. Charles extended his hand. Let me see. Ethan gave him the pages. Charles read them slowly. Victoria watched his expression change. Why was this not in the board package? He asked. Marcus exhaled. Because legal has not classified it as material. Has legal reviewed the guarantee structure? They reviewed the summary. Ethan said nothing. Charles looked up. That was not the question. Marcus's jaw tightened. Victoria turned toward him. Get legal back in the room. We already cleared diligence. Then clear it again. Marcus looked toward Ethan. Because he walked in with 3 pages? Victoria met his eyes. Because you still have not answered the question. That was the first moment Ethan saw something shift in her. Not trust. Not yet. But discipline. She had been arrogant in the lobby, but she was not careless enough to ignore a number once it became real. Charles nodded toward the conference room. We continue inside. Ethan checked his watch again. I cannot stay long. Charles almost laughed. You disappear for 12 years, walk in with a $214 million liability, and now you are busy? My daughter is downstairs. Victoria looked at him. Your daughter? Lily. She is 10. Charles's expression softened. Bring her up. Ethan shook his head. No, why not? Because she has homework and this floor has enough problems already. Victoria nearly smiled despite herself. Marcus did not. Charles handed the pages back. 10 minutes, then. Ethan nodded. 10. They entered the conference room. The acquisition model covered the main screen. Ethan stood at the edge of the table instead of taking a chair. Victoria sat across from him. 12 years ago, she said. What exactly did you do here? Ethan looked at Charles. He already told you. He told me you designed a restructuring. That is enough. Charles shook his head. No, Ethan. It is not. He turned to Victoria. He found the debt cascade everyone else missed. Negotiated breathing room with 3 lenders. Rebuilt our operating model. Then refused the executive position I offered him. Victoria looked back at Ethan. Why? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Because my wife was sick. The room changed. Even Marcus lowered his eyes. Ethan continued. She died the following year. Lily was still a baby. Charles said nothing. Victoria's expression softened. And you left. I became a father full-time. You walked away from this company for that. Ethan met her eyes. I walked toward my daughter. No one spoke. Then the conference phone chimed. Legal had joined. Ethan turned back to the screen. Start with Marston. The past could wait. The numbers could not. Legal joined the conference by video, and the first answer did not help Marcus read. The guarantee structure exists, the senior counsel said. Victoria Hale leaned toward the screen. Was it included in the acquisition risk summary? A pause. Not in full. Marcus turned toward the monitor. Because it was considered remote. Ethan Brooks finally took a seat. Remote is not the same as impossible. The attorney nodded. That is correct. Charles Whitman placed both hands on the table. Then quantify it. For the next 20 minutes, the room stopped caring who had been insulted in the lobby. Lawyers pulled covenant language. Finance reopened lender schedules. An analyst joined with updated coverage ratios. Ethan said very little. He did not need to. Every new page moved the discussion closer to the same place he had pointed toward before anyone wanted to listen. Here, he said at last. Second quarter coverage. Victoria looked at the screen. 1.06. And the minimum? 1.1. Marcus answered before anyone else could. Ethan looked at him. Then the first test is already missed. Temporarily. Maybe. Ethan tapped the next line. What happens if the next quarter misses too? No one spoke. Legal answered. The operating guarantee can be triggered. Charles looked toward Marcus. And that creates the exposure? Ethan nodded. Potentially $214 million, depending on lender enforcement and asset value. Victoria's expression hardened. Why was this modeled as zero? Marcus exhaled. Because the transaction team believed the subsidiary would recover before the next test. Believed? Victoria asked. Based on forecast performance. Ethan looked at the acquisition deck. Whose forecast? Marcus did not answer immediately. The silence told Victoria enough. Marcus. Our strategy team prepared it. Ethan turned another page. Using 12% revenue growth. Correct. Marston has grown 3% over the last 4 quarters. Integration changes the trajectory. Maybe. Ethan's voice stayed calm. But you are using the better future to erase the worse present. Victoria leaned back slowly. The insult from earlier now felt embarrassingly small compared with what sat in front of her. I want an independent audit of the entire acquisition model. Marcus looked at her. That could delay closing. Then closing waits. We have exclusivity deadlines. Deadlines do not make missing liabilities disappear. Ethan glanced at his watch. 11 minutes had passed. He stood. Charles looked at him. Where are you going? Downstairs. Ethan. I promised Lily 10 minutes. Victoria rose too. You are leaving now? Yes. She looked genuinely surprised. After dropping this into the room? Ethan picked up his leather folder. The company has lawyers, auditors, finance people, and a chief executive officer. His eyes met hers. You do not need me to believe the evidence once it is in front of you. Victoria absorbed that quietly. And if the audit confirms you are right? Ethan paused near the door. Then fix the deal. That is all. What else would there be? Marcus gave a bitter laugh. You walk in after 12 years, embarrass half the executive team, and act like you want nothing. Ethan looked at him. I did not embarrass anyone. You exposed a mistake. Those are not the same thing. The room went still. Charles smiled faintly, as if he had heard that kind of answer from Ethan many years ago. Victoria walked with him toward the lobby. Mr. Brooks. Ethan stopped. Ethan is fine. She hesitated. I owe you an apology. For the lobby? For deciding who you were before asking. He looked toward the elevator doors. That is usually the expensive version of confidence. Victoria almost smiled. Do you always talk like that? Only when I am late. The elevator opened. Downstairs, Lily was still sitting in the employee cafe with her coloring book open beside a half-finished grilled cheese sandwich. When she saw Ethan, she lifted one eyebrow. That was more than 10 minutes. He sat across from her. I know. Big problem. Maybe. Did you fix it? Ethan took one of her fries. No, Lily frowned. Then what did you do? He looked toward the ceiling, 40 floors above them, where an acquisition worth $650 million had just been stopped for review. I made sure the right people could see it. Lily nodded as if that made perfect sense. Upstairs, Victoria stood beside the conference table while Marcus argued about timing and Charles quietly reread Ethan's pages. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, Victoria understood that the most dangerous person in the room was not always the one with the highest title. Sometimes it was the quiet man who noticed what everyone powerful had agreed not to question. The independent audit began the next morning, and by noon Victoria Hale had stopped asking whether Ethan Brooks might be right. The question had become how much else the acquisition team had failed to challenge. External auditors joined finance, legal, and risk inside the same conference room where Marcus Reed had defended the model less than 24 hours earlier. Victoria stood near the screen while Charles Whitman reviewed the first findings in silence. The guarantee exposure is real, the lead auditor said. Probability is uncertain, but the zero-risk treatment is not supportable. Victoria looked at Marcus. Why was it excluded? Because the recovery case was strong. Strong enough to ignore $214 million? Strong enough to consider it remote. Charles closed the report. Remote does not mean invisible. Marcus exhaled. We are losing perspective. Victoria turned toward him. Then give me the right perspective. The acquisition still creates significant strategic value. That is not the question. Marcus's expression hardened. You are letting one man derail 6 months of work. Victoria looked at the empty chair Ethan had occupied the day before. No, I am letting evidence interrupt momentum. The room went quiet. 2 floors below, Ethan was not thinking about acquisitions at all. He sat across from Lily in a small diner near her school, helping her understand long division while she pushed peas around a plate. You are doing it again, she said. Doing what? Looking at your phone without reading it. Ethan placed the phone face down. Sorry. Work? Sort of. The company from yesterday? Yes. Lily drew a line beneath her homework problem. Are they in trouble? Ethan thought about the question. They are close to making an expensive mistake. And you stopped them? I asked them to check. Lily frowned. That sounds less impressive. Ethan smiled. Usually checking is more useful than looking impressive. His phone buzzed again. This time the message was from Charles. Audit confirmed exposure. Need you back. Ethan read it once. Lily saw his expression. You have to go. Not until we finish this. Dad. What? I am 10, not helpless. Ethan looked at her. That is becoming a problem. She smiled. Go. 25 minutes later, Ethan returned to Hale Dynamics. Victoria was waiting near the executive elevators. Thank you for coming. Charles made it sound urgent. It is. They walked toward the conference room. The audit confirmed the guarantee issue, she said. And another problem. Ethan looked at her. What kind? The acquisition model assumes the subsidiary debt can be refinanced within 12 months. At what rate? 6.2%. Ethan stopped walking. Current comparable debt is closer to 8. Victoria nodded. The auditors said the same thing. Then the coverage problem gets worse after refinancing. Exactly. Ethan resumed walking. How many employees are tied to the integration plan? Victoria hesitated. Approximately 400 positions could be eliminated if the acquisition underperforms. Ethan's face changed. That was not in the presentation. Not explicitly. Why? It was described as operational efficiency. Ethan gave her a long look. That phrase hides a lot of people. Victoria lowered her eyes. I know that now. Inside the conference room, Marcus was waiting. So we called him back. Ethan sat down. You did not call me. Same difference. Not really. Charles raised a hand. Enough. He turned toward Ethan. The auditors confirmed the debt issue and the refinancing assumptions. I want your view. Ethan looked at the updated model. My view does not matter. Marcus laughed once. Convenient. Ethan continued. The math matters. Lower the growth assumption. Use market refinancing rates. Trigger the guarantee in the downside case. Then show the board what happens to cash flow and jobs. Victoria nodded. We can do that. Marcus leaned forward. And if the deal fails under your assumptions? Ethan looked at him. Then maybe the deal is failing before we own it. Silence. Charles turned toward finance. Run it. The numbers changed across the screen. Revenue growth came down. Interest expense rose. Guarantee exposure appeared. Cash flow narrowed. Then one red figure settled at the bottom of the page. The acquisition no longer cleared Hale Dynamics' minimum return threshold. Marcus stared at the screen. Victoria did not. She looked at Ethan. You knew? He shook his head. I suspected. That is different. Very. Charles leaned back. Marcus, why did your team not run this case? Marcus's voice was quieter now. Because we believed it was too conservative. Ethan looked at him. Conservative assumptions are cheaper than optimistic mistakes. Marcus said nothing. Victoria closed the acquisition deck. The vote is canceled until the structure is rebuilt. Charles nodded. Agreed. Ethan stood. Victoria stopped him. Ethan. He looked back. 400 people nearly became a footnote. Her voice had changed. There was no arrogance in it now. I signed off on the summary. Ethan did not soften the truth for her. Then make sure the next one tells you who pays when the assumptions are wrong. She held his gaze. Will you help us rebuild it? Ethan glanced toward the elevator, toward the life waiting below the executive floor. I will help you verify it. Not lead it. No, why? Ethan picked up his leather folder. Because I came back to stop a mistake, not to get my old life back. Charles watched him leave. Victoria remained beside the closed acquisition deck, understanding something she had not understood the day before. Ethan Brooks had once saved Hale Dynamics because he knew how to restructure a company. He was saving it again because he knew something harder, when to walk away from power before power convinced you that you deserved it. The next 5 days were quieter than anyone expected. No dramatic announcement followed the canceled vote. No executive was escorted out. No press statement appeared. Hale Dynamics simply stopped moving forward long enough to look at what it had almost agreed to. Ethan Brooks returned twice, never for more than a few hours, and always after making sure Lily's school schedule came first. He did not take Charles Whitman's old office. He did not accept an executive badge. He sat wherever there was an empty chair and asked the same kind of questions that had irritated people 12 years earlier. What happens if growth is 6%? What happens if refinancing stays above 8%? Who absorbs the cost if the integration misses? Victoria Hale listened differently now. She no longer interrupted him to defend the model. She wrote things down. On Thursday afternoon, the revised acquisition team gathered around a smaller conference table with finance, legal, risk, and operations present. Marcus Reed sat near the far end, unusually quiet. Victoria opened the meeting. "We are not here to rescue the original deal." She looked around the room. "We are here to find out whether there is a deal worth doing." Ethan gave a small nod. That was better. Finance presented the first revision. The purchase price had been reduced. The growth forecast had been lowered. The Marston guarantee was now included in the downside case. Refinancing costs were modeled at current market rates. Then operations reached the workforce plan. Original integration savings assumed approximately 400 position eliminations over 18 months, the operations director said. Ethan looked up. And the revised case? 230. Victoria's expression tightened. Why still that many? Some duplication is real. Ethan asked, "How much?" The director switched slides. About 140 positions across administration, procurement, and overlapping field support. And the remaining 90? Silence. Marcus finally spoke. "Efficiency targets." Ethan looked at him. "That is not a job function." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We need the acquisition to reach the board's return threshold. Then show the board the return without those 90 cuts. It falls below target." Ethan leaned back. "Then the truth is the acquisition does not meet target without asking 90 more families to carry the difference." The room went quiet. Marcus exhaled. "You make every reduction sound immoral." No, Ethan's voice stayed calm. "Some reductions are necessary. Hiding necessity inside a target is different." Victoria looked toward operations. "Run both versions." The numbers appeared side by side. One model met the return threshold. The other missed it by less than 1 percentage point. Charles studied the screen. "How much value are we arguing over?" Finance answered. "Approximately $11 million over the first 3 years." Ethan looked at the total purchase price. "On a $650 million acquisition." "Correct." He said nothing. Victoria understood before he spoke. "We were prepared to eliminate 90 additional positions to protect less than 2% of the transaction value." Marcus shook his head. "That is an oversimplification." Victoria turned toward him. "Then explain it better." He opened his mouth, but the room stayed silent long enough to make the answer difficult. "Finally," he said, "the board expects discipline." Charles looked at him. "Discipline is not the same as squeezing every assumption until people disappear." Marcus lowered his eyes. Ethan watched Charles, not with satisfaction, but with recognition. The old chairman had changed too. Maybe age had done what success sometimes could not. Maybe 12 years of watching good people carry bad decisions had taught him the cost of elegant spreadsheets. Victoria closed the workforce slide. "Remove the additional 90 cuts." Marcus looked at her sharply. "That puts the return below threshold. Then we renegotiate price. The seller may walk. Then they walk." Her voice was steady. "I am not manufacturing a return by pretending people are free." Ethan looked at her for a moment. She noticed. "What? Nothing. That means something." He almost smiled. "You are asking better questions." Victoria gave a quiet breath. "High praise." Charles smiled. Marcus did not. The meeting ended shortly before 5. Ethan checked his phone and found 3 messages from Lily. The first was a photograph of a science worksheet. The second said, "I think number 7 is wrong." The third said, "Also we are out of cereal." Ethan stood. Victoria gathered her papers. "Leaving?" "Yes. Board dinner is at 6. Lily has homework." Charles looked amused. "You still refuse every useful dinner invitation. Some traditions matter." Victoria walked with him toward the elevators. "Ethan." He stopped. "I have been thinking about the first day." "That sounds dangerous." She ignored the joke. "I asked who you were as if your answer only mattered if your title impressed me." Ethan said nothing. That was not leadership. No, she looked at him. You could make this apology easier. You do not need me to. Victoria nodded slowly. Fair. The elevator arrived. Before Ethan stepped inside, she asked, why did you really come back? You could have sent the documents anonymously. He looked toward the conference room behind her. Because anonymous warnings are easy to dismiss. And you knew Charles would recognize you. I hoped he would listen. You knew he would. Ethan thought about that. I knew the man he used to be. Victoria's expression softened. And me? Ethan met her eyes. I did not know you at all. The doors began to close. Victoria stopped them with one hand. Do you now? Ethan looked at her for a second longer. I know you corrected yourself when the evidence changed. Is that good? It is rare. The doors closed. 20 minutes later, Ethan was standing in a grocery aisle arguing with Lily about cereal sugar content, while Hale Dynamics renegotiated a transaction worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He preferred the grocery aisle. Upstairs, Victoria returned to the conference room and found Marcus still there, staring at the revised model. He is changing this company again, Marcus said. Victoria looked at the empty chair Ethan had used. No, she picked up the workforce report. He is reminding us what the company was supposed to be before we got too comfortable calling every compromise strategy. Marcus looked at her. And if the seller refuses the new price? Victoria closed the folder. Then we lose the deal. The board will not like that. She met his eyes. The board can survive disappointment. 400 families should not have to survive our arrogance. For the first time, Marcus had nothing ready to say. The seller rejected Hale Dynamics' revised price the next morning. Marcus Reed called it proof that Victoria Hale had pushed the negotiations too far. Charles Whitman called it useful information. Ethan Brooks did not call it anything. He was home making scrambled eggs while Lily sat at the kitchen table building a cardboard model for school. His phone rang just after 7:30. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. You are calling before coffee, Ethan said. The seller walked. He turned off the stove. Completely. For now. Then let them. Marcus thinks we should restore part of the original workforce savings to close the gap. Ethan looked toward Lily. She was measuring a cardboard support with a ruler, completely unaware that hundreds of jobs were sitting inside the conversation. How much? He asked. Enough to bring back roughly 60 of the 90 additional cuts. Ethan was quiet. And you? Victoria asked. You already know what I think. I want to hear it. If the deal only works when 60 more people become the discount, then the price is still wrong. Victoria exhaled. The board meets at 10. Then tell them that. Charles wants you there. Ethan glanced at Lily. I have a school drop-off. After. Maybe. That means yes. It means maybe. Lily looked up. Is that the boss lady? Ethan covered the phone. She can hear you. Good. Victoria laughed quietly on the other end. Boss lady. Long story. I have time. Apparently. After dropping Lily at school, Ethan drove to Hale Dynamics. The boardroom was already full when he arrived. Charles sat at the head of the table. Victoria stood beside the screen. Marcus had prepared a revised savings proposal. Ethan took the only empty chair near the end. Marcus looked at him. Glad you could join us. I had serial negotiations. Charles smiled. Victoria did not hide hers. Marcus ignored them. The seller's position is clear. They will move on price only if we demonstrate additional post-close savings. Ethan looked at the screen. Meaning layoffs. Meaning efficiency. How many? 60. Ethan leaned back. Then call them 60 jobs. Marcus's jaw tightened. The board understands what the number represents. Do the employees? Silence. Victoria looked toward finance. Show the alternative. A second model appeared. Lower acquisition price. No added cuts. Reduced first-year return. Slower integration. Charles studied it. Difference. About $14 million over 3 years, finance answered. Marcus shook his head. We are compromising discipline again. Ethan looked at him. $14 million on a $650 million transaction. That is still shareholder value. So are trained employees who know how the company works. Marcus folded his arms. You are sentimentalizing capital allocation. Ethan's voice stayed level. You are dehumanizing it. The room went silent. Victoria did not intervene. She let the sentence stay where it landed. Marcus turned toward her. You agree with this? Victoria looked around the table. I agree that we are too comfortable treating jobs as the easiest variable Because the people attached to them are not sitting here. Charles nodded slowly. Then bring them into the model. Finance frowned. How? Ethan answered. Cost of turnover. Replacement hiring. Training. Productivity loss. Customer disruption. Put a price on what happens after someone disappears from payroll. The analyst began typing. Marcus looked irritated. That is speculative. So is your growth forecast. 10 minutes later, the revised model returned. Once turnover and replacement costs were added, the supposed savings from 60 extra cuts fell by more than half. Victoria looked at the screen. There it is. Marcus stared at the numbers. Those assumptions can be debated. Then debate them, Ethan said. But stop pretending layoffs are free. Charles turned toward the board. I want to vote on the revised structure. Lower price. No additional 60 cuts. Full disclosure of the Marston guarantee. Independent review of refinancing assumptions. Marcus looked at Victoria. And if the seller refuses again? She answered before Ethan could. Then we walk. The vote passed. Not unanimously, but clearly. Marcus was the only executive in the room who looked surprised. Afterward, Charles asked Ethan to stay. Victoria remained too. Charles closed the board packet. You have done this twice now. Ethan looked at him. Done what? Returned when we were about to convince ourselves of something convenient. Ethan smiled faintly. Bad habit. Charles pushed a folder across the table. Come back officially. Ethan did not touch it. No, Victoria looked at him. You did not even open it. I know what it is. Executive advisory role, Charles said. Flexible schedule. Strategic review authority. No daily operations. Ethan looked at the folder, then toward the window. I am not coming back for a title. Charles leaned forward. Then come back for influence. Ethan shook his head. Influence is useful until people stop questioning it. Victoria watched him carefully. What would make you say yes? Ethan thought for a moment. Nothing today. Charles sighed. Still impossible. Consistent. Ethan stood. Victoria followed him toward the door. You know, she said, most people spend their careers trying to get into this room. Ethan looked at her. Most people do not have Lily waiting at 3:15. That is your answer to everything. The important things. Victoria nodded. I think I am starting to understand that. Ethan paused. Good. She looked at him. Is that all I get? For now. He smiled and left. Victoria stood in the doorway watching him walk toward the elevator. 6 days earlier, she had asked who he was as if a title could settle the question. Now she understood the answer was harder. Ethan Brooks was the man who could have taken power and chose responsibility instead. The father who walked away from applause because a 10-year-old girl expected him at school, and the quiet voice that kept reminding rooms full of powerful people that numbers were never more important than the people forced to live inside them. The seller came back 4 days later. Not with the original price. Not with the original assumptions. With a revised offer that accepted Hale Dynamics' lower valuation, disclosed the Marston guarantee in full, and removed the additional 60 job cuts from the integration plan. Victoria Hale read the term sheet twice before calling Charles Whitman. They moved. Charles answered, Good. You do not sound surprised. I have been doing this longer than you. That is not an answer. It is the answer you are getting. By noon, finance confirmed the revised structure still worked under conservative growth and refinancing assumptions. The return was lower than Marcus Reed had promised 2 weeks earlier, but it was real. Victoria preferred that now. Marcus did not. He stood near the conference room window with his arms folded while the final integration model filled the screen. We left money on the table, he said. Victoria looked at him. Whose money? Shareholder value. No. Be specific. Marcus frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Which line did we refuse to cut? He looked toward the workforce section. Victoria nodded. Exactly. Marcus exhaled. You are turning one acquisition into a philosophy lesson. Charles closed his folder. Maybe it needed one. Ethan Brooks was not in the room. That bothered Marcus almost as much as when he was. Where is our unofficial conscience today? Victoria ignored the tone. With his daughter. Of course. Charles looked at Marcus. You say that like being a father is an inconvenience. Marcus did not answer. The board approved the revised deal that afternoon. 230 necessary integration reductions remained, but the additional 90 positions once used merely to force the return above target were gone. The Marston liability was visible. Refinancing assumptions reflected the market. No one celebrated as if a spreadsheet had become moral. They simply stopped pretending the cost belonged to nobody. Victoria sent Ethan one message. Revised deal approved. No extra cuts. Full liability disclosure. His reply came 10 minutes later. Good. That was all. She stared at the word longer than she expected. That evening, Ethan sat in a folding chair inside Lily's elementary school gymnasium while she stood beside a science display about water filtration. Construction paper signs covered the walls. Parents carried paper cups of coffee. Somewhere near the entrance, a microphone squealed and 3 children laughed. Ethan would not have traded the room for any board dinner in the city. You were supposed to ask me questions, Lily said. I know. You were just staring. I am appreciating the presentation. That is not a question. Ethan smiled. Fine. Why did you use 3 filter layers? Lily launched into an explanation involving gravel, sand, and activated carbon. Halfway through, Ethan noticed Victoria standing near the gym doors. She wore a simple navy coat instead of an executive suit and looked strangely uncertain without a conference table in front of her. Lily noticed his expression and turned. Is that boss lady? Ethan lowered his voice. Please stop calling her that. So yes. Victoria approached holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers. Hi. Ethan stood. What are you doing here? Charles told me Lily had a science night. Charles talks too much. Frequently. Lily stepped forward. I am Lily. Victoria smiled. Victoria. I know. Dad almost got kicked out because of you. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Victoria looked at him. She is direct. Inherited problem. Lily pointed toward her display. Want to see my filter? Victoria nodded. Absolutely. For the next 15 minutes, the chief executive officer of Hale Dynamics listened to a 10-year-old explain dirty water, charcoal layers, and why Ethan had purchased the wrong gravel the first time. She asked real questions. She did not check her phone once. Ethan watched quietly. After Lily left to show a teacher her results sheet, Victoria stood beside him near the bleachers. The deal was approved. I saw. You saved us from a serious mistake. Ethan shook his head. The audit did. You found the problem. That does not make the correction mine. Victoria looked toward Lily across the gym. Do you always refuse credit? No, when do you take it? Ethan considered the question. When taking it helps someone. She smiled faintly. That answer is irritating. Marcus would agree. Her smile faded. He is stepping back from acquisition oversight while the board reviews the process. Ethan looked at her. Because he was wrong? Because he resisted verification after the risk was identified. Ethan nodded once. That matters more. Victoria looked at him carefully. You really do separate pride from responsibility. I try. I am still learning. Lily returned carrying a blue ribbon marked honorable mention. Ethan's face changed immediately. Look at that. 3rd place would have been better, Lily said. Honorable mention is excellent. Dad, it is. Victoria handed her the flowers. Congratulations. Lily smiled. Thanks. Then she looked between them. Are you 2 friends now? Ethan and Victoria answered at the same time. Maybe. Lily grinned. The gym buzzed around them, ordinary and warm. A week earlier, Victoria had only known Ethan as the stranger who interrupted her executive floor. Now she was beginning to understand that the man Charles respected most was not defined by the room he once saved. He was defined by the rooms he kept choosing to return to. Over the next month, the changes inside Hale Dynamics became visible in ways no board presentation could fully capture. Acquisition teams were required to document downside cases before celebrating upside forecasts. Workforce impacts were reviewed beside financial returns. Legal summaries could no longer bury material guarantees inside supporting files. Marcus Reed remained with the company, but his authority over major acquisitions was reduced while the board completed its process review. Victoria Hale did not treat that as punishment. She treated it as accountability. Ethan Brooks noticed the difference from a distance. He had returned only twice since the revised deal was approved, both times to review specific assumptions Charles Whitman wanted challenged before they reached the board. He still refused the executive advisory role. He still left before school pickup. And he still carried the same worn leather folder that had caused security to underestimate him on the first day. One Thursday afternoon, Victoria found him alone in a smaller conference room reading a risk summary. You circled something. Ethan looked up. 3 things. That bad. Not bad. Vague. She sat across from him. Teach me the difference. Ethan slid the page toward her. Bad means we know the problem. Vague means someone has not asked enough questions yet. Victoria read the first line. Supplier concentration. How concentrated? It does not say. Exactly. She nodded and marked the page. Second, customer retention risk. No percentage. Good. Third. She found it herself. Integration savings. Ethan smiled faintly. You are getting dangerous. High praise again. Maybe. Victoria leaned back. Charles still wants you here permanently. Charles wants everyone permanently. He wants you differently. Ethan closed the folder. I know. Why do you keep saying no? Because I know what this place can take if I let it. Victoria's expression softened. Your wife. Ethan looked toward the window. Partly. And Lily. Mostly. The room grew quiet. Victoria did not rush to fill it. That was something else she had learned. I used to think sacrifice proved ambition, she said. Longer hours. More travel. Always being available. Ethan looked at her. And now? Now I think some people use work to avoid deciding what actually matters. He smiled slightly. That sounds expensive. You really need new material. It keeps working. She laughed. The sound felt different from the sharp confidence he remembered in the lobby. Less guarded. More human. That evening, Victoria joined Ethan and Lily for dinner at a neighborhood pizza place after Lily's soccer practice. Lily arrived wearing grass-stained socks and carrying a water bottle covered in stickers. Boss lady, she said. Ethan sighed. We discussed this. Victoria smiled. I have accepted it. Lily slid into the booth. Good. Dad does not like change. That is not true. You have owned the same coffee mug for 8 years. It still works. Victoria laughed. I am beginning to understand the pattern. Dinner was ordinary. That was what made it matter. Lily complained about homework. Ethan argued that pineapple did not belong on pizza. Victoria disagreed strongly enough to earn Lily's immediate loyalty. No one talked about $650 million acquisitions until Lily went to wash her hands. Then Victoria lowered her voice. Marcus apologized today. Ethan looked surprised. To you? To the team. For what? For dismissing the risk review and pushing too hard to protect the original deal. Ethan nodded. Good. That is all. What do you want me to say? I do not know. Something wise. Apologies are useful if behavior follows. Victoria looked at him. There it is. What? The thing Charles sees. Ethan's expression changed slightly. Be careful. I am serious. That is what worries me. She rested her hands around her coffee cup. You walked into that building and changed how I lead. Ethan shook his head. No, you did. I asked questions. Exactly. Lily returned before Victoria could continue. What did I miss? Your father refusing credit, Victoria said. Lily sat down. He does that. Ethan looked between them. This feels coordinated. Maybe, Lily said. Later, outside beneath the parking lot lights, Lily ran ahead to retrieve a forgotten jacket from the car. Victoria stood beside Ethan in the cool evening air. I am glad Charles said your name that day. Ethan looked at her. Why? Because I would have let security walk you out. Probably. And I would have missed everything after. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You corrected yourself. After someone more powerful told me who you were. Her expression tightened. That still bothers me. Ethan nodded. Good. Good. If it bothers you, maybe next time respect comes before recognition. Victoria looked at him. There was no judgment in his voice. Only truth. I am trying. I know. Lily called from the pickup. Are you two coming? Ethan stepped away. Victoria smiled. She has terrible timing. She would call it leadership. They walked toward the truck together. A month earlier, Victoria had needed the chairman to say Ethan Brooks's name before she stopped seeing an intruder. Now she was beginning to understand that respect mattered most before a person's name carried any weight at all. 6 months later, Hale Dynamics was not a perfect company. Ethan Brooks would have distrusted any story that ended by pretending otherwise. But it had become a company that asked better questions before making expensive decisions. Every major acquisition now included downside modeling, independent liability review, and a written workforce impact assessment. The revised $650 million deal was performing close to the conservative case. The Marston exposure remained manageable. Most importantly, the additional 90 jobs that had once existed only as a way to force the return above target had never been cut. Victoria Hale had changed too. She still moved quickly. She still expected precision. She still frightened junior executives when they came unprepared, but she had stopped treating confidence as proof. "What are we missing?" had become the question people heard most often from her. Marcus Reed remained Chief Operating Officer, though his role in acquisition stayed limited. He had adapted more slowly, but honestly enough. When a new strategy proposal arrived with unusually clean savings assumptions, Marcus was the first person to say, "Run the ugly case too." Charles Whitman nearly applauded. Ethan heard about it later and simply said, "Good." Charles stared at him. "One day I am going to get more than one word from you." Unlikely. Ethan still refused a permanent executive position. Instead, he agreed to something narrower. For strategic reviews a year, scheduled around Lily's school calendar, with no title printed larger than his name. Charles called it stubborn. Victoria called it progress. Lily called it Dad finally admitting he likes telling companies when their math is bad. On a cool Friday evening, Hale Dynamics hosted a scholarship reception for employees' children. Lily had been invited to display her water filtration project after winning a district science award. Ethan stood near the back of the auditorium in a dark jacket, watching her explain activated carbon to a group of engineers twice her age. Victoria walked up beside him. "She is better at presentations than you." Low bar. "She also smiles more." Unnecessary. Victoria laughed. Across the room, Charles stepped to the microphone. "Before we close tonight, I want to recognize someone." Ethan immediately looked suspicious. "Charles," he muttered. Victoria smiled. "Too late." Charles continued. "Years ago, when this company was close to failure, one man helped us see what our own assumptions were hiding. He walked away from the title we offered because his family needed him more." Ethan lowered his eyes. "And 6 months ago, he did it again." The room quieted. Not because he wanted power, because he saw a problem, and because 400 people should never become invisible inside a model. Charles looked toward the back. Ethan Brooks. This time, when the name moved through the room, there was no shock. Only respect. Ethan did not walk to the stage. He shook his head once. Charles smiled. "Of course he is not coming up here." People laughed softly. Lily turned toward her father and grinned. Victoria leaned closer. "Still hate recognition?" Strong word. "Dislike?" Better. The reception ended an hour later. Charles left with the board members. Lily collected her project materials. Victoria helped carry one of the poster boards to Ethan's pickup. "I still remember the first thing I said to you," she said. Ethan opened the tailgate. "Unfortunately, so do I. I asked who you were like. I was deciding whether you deserved respect." Ethan placed the board inside. "You were having a bad day. Do not make excuses for me." "I am not." She looked at him. "Then what would you say now?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I would say you learned." "That is generous." "No. Generous would be pretending it never mattered." Victoria was quiet. "I'm glad it mattered." Ethan looked at her. "Why?" "Because I never want to need someone powerful to say a person's name before I treat them like they belong in the room." Ethan nodded slowly. Then it taught the right lesson. Lily appeared carrying her backpack. "Are we getting dinner or conducting another leadership seminar?" Ethan smiled. "Dinner." Victoria looked at Lily. "Am I invited?" Lily answered before Ethan could. Obviously. They drove to the same neighborhood pizza place they had visited months earlier. Lily ordered pineapple just to annoy Ethan. Victoria supported her. Ethan claimed betrayal. The three of them laughed until the waitress looked over and smiled. Later, when Lily went to refill her drink, Victoria rested her hand on the table near Ethan's. "You know, Charles thinks I should thank you for changing how I lead." Ethan shook his head. "You changed how you lead. Because you made me look at myself. Then thank the evidence." Victoria smiled. "Impossible, man." Ethan looked toward Lily returning with her cup. Then back at Victoria. "Maybe." Their hands touched gently between them. Neither pulled away. Outside, evening traffic passed beneath soft streetlights. No board waited. No acquisition hung in the balance. No one in the restaurant knew Charles Whitman's name, or Victoria's title, or the story of how Ethan had once saved a company twice. And that was enough. Because Ethan Brooks had never needed a chairman to make him important. He had been important when he was a grieving father holding a baby through the night. He had been important when he walked away from executive power to raise Lily. He had been important when security thought he did not belong upstairs. The chairman had only said his name. What changed the room was everything Ethan had done before anyone thought to ask who he was.